Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! Striding with an unfamiliar clack beneath the autumnal glow, Cash's disguise was both buoyed and betrayed by the breeze. He was a vision in red, the silk whispering softly in the wind. But his breath, fleetingly visible in the chill, indicated a danger of icy nerves. The scent of sweet spices and festive delights couldn't mask his anxiety as the tremble of his fingers hinted at the months of meticulous preparation. From the careful strokes of makeup to the careful glide of silk over carefully crafted curves. As he stood there, embodying this new persona, a whisper of determination broke the muffled harmony floating from within. "I am Maisy," he mouthed, his voice barely rippling the air. With this exhortation, he took his first steps into uncharted territory, the heels clicking a melody that echoed his courage. Cash's heels clicked against the polished floor as he made his way to the elevators, each step a small victory in balance and poise. As the elevator doors slid open on the party floor, a wave of noise washed over him. Colleagues in various costumes milled about, drinks in hand, engaged in animated conversations. Cash hesitated for a moment, overcome by a sudden urge to turn back. But then he caught sight of his reflection in a nearby mirror. The stunning woman staring back at him gave him a surge of confidence. He stepped into the fray, a shy smile playing on his perfectly painted lips. "You can do this, Maisy," he reminded himself, adopting the persona he'd crafted so carefully. "Well, hello there!" a booming voice called out. Cash turned to see his supervisor, Dave, dressed as a pirate, approaching with a grin. "I don't believe we've met. Are you new to the company?" Cash's heart raced, but he managed to keep his composure.
"Hi, I'm Maisy,"
he replied, his voice soft and melodious, the result of hours of practice. "I'm here with a friend." Dave's eyes widened appreciatively.
"Well, Maisy, welcome to our little shindig. You look absolutely stunning. That dress is killer!"
A genuine smile spread across Cash's face.
"Thank you so much,"
he said, feeling a thrill at the compliment.
"I love your costume too. Very swashbuckling."
Dave let out a hearty laugh.
"Why, thank you, milady. Now, can I get you a drink? We've got quite the selection at the bar."
Cash nodded, grateful for the offer.
"A glass of white wine would be lovely. Thank you."
As Dave moved off towards the bar, Cash took a moment to survey the room. He spotted familiar faces, colleagues he worked with every day, but none of them seemed to recognize him. It was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking.
"Here you go, Maisy,"
Dave said, returning with a glass of chilled white wine.
"So, tell me, what do you do?"
Cash took a sip of wine, buying himself a moment to think.
"I'm in marketing,"
he said, sticking close to the truth.
"I love the creative aspects of the job."
Dave nodded approvingly.
"We've got a great marketing team here. You should meet some of them. In fact..."
He turned, waving to a group nearby.
"Hey guys, come meet Maisy."
Cash's breath caught in his throat as he saw his closest work friends approaching. This was the real test. Could he fool the people who knew him best?
"Maisy, this is Tom from graphic design and Rachel from social media,"
Dave introduced.
"Guys, Maisy here works in marketing."
Tom, dressed as a zombie, extended a gray painted hand.
"Nice to meet you, Maisy. Great costume!
Cash shook his hand, marveling at how small his own looked in comparison.
Thank you, he said. I love yours too. Very brainy.
Rachel, sporting a Wonder Woman outfit, laughed. Oh, I like her already, she said. So, Maisy, are you new? I don't think I've seen you around the office. Cash felt a flutter of panic, but managed to keep his voice steady.
Oh, I'm not with the company,
he lied smoothly.
I'm here with a friend, but I do work in marketing elsewhere.
Well, you picked a great party to crash, Rachel said with a wink. We know how to have fun around here. As the conversation flowed, Cash found himself relaxing. He'd worried about keeping up the act, but to his surprise, it felt almost natural. He laughed at jokes, shared anecdotes, carefully modified to fit his persona, and even dared to make a few witty comments of his own. The night wore on, and Cash found himself swept up in the festivities. He danced, careful to move with the grace he'd practiced, and chatted with more colleagues. Each interaction bolstered his confidence, and he began to truly enjoy himself. It was nearing midnight when Cash decided it was time to make his exit. He'd managed to fool everyone, even his closest coworkers, and the thrill of success was intoxicating. As he made his goodbyes, he caught sight of himself in a mirror once more. The woman who looked back at him seemed more real than ever before. The cool night air was a relief after the warmth of the party. Cash made his way to his car, heels clicking on the pavement, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. As he settled into the driver's seat, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. For years, he'd struggled with his identity, never quite feeling comfortable in his own skin. Tonight had been a revelation. As Maisy, he'd felt more like himself than he ever had as Cash. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Over the next few weeks, Cash found himself thinking constantly about his experience at the Halloween party. He went through the motions of his daily life, going to work, interacting with colleagues, living as he always had. But something had fundamentally shifted inside him. Every evening, he would come home and transform into Maisy. He'd practice his makeup, try on different outfits, and work on his feminine mannerisms. It was no longer just about perfecting a costume. It was about exploring a part of himself he'd long kept hidden. As the days turned into weeks, Cash began to realize that his desire to be Maisy was more than just a fleeting fancy. He started researching gender identity and transition, spending hours reading personal accounts and medical information. The more he learned, the more certain he became that this was the path he needed to follow. One Saturday morning, about a month after the Halloween party, Cash made a decision. He couldn't keep living a double life. It was time to take the next step. With trembling hands, he dialed the number of a gender therapist he'd found online. As the phone rang, he paced nervously in his living room, his heart pounding in his chest.
Hello, Dr. Anderson's office.
A friendly voice answered. Cash took a deep breath.
Hi, I'd like to make an appointment with Dr. Anderson. It's about gender identity issues.
The receptionist was kind and understanding, quickly setting up an appointment for the following week. As Cash hung up the phone, he felt a mix of terror and relief. He was taking the first step on a journey that both excited and frightened him. The week leading up to the appointment was a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Cash found it increasingly difficult to concentrate at work, his mind constantly drifting to thoughts of his future. Would he transition? How would his colleagues react? His family? The questions seemed endless. Finally, the day of the appointment arrived. Cash sat in Dr. Anderson's waiting room, his leg bouncing nervously. He'd come straight from work, still in his male attire, but he'd never felt more out of place in it. "Cash?" the receptionist called. "Dr. Anderson will see you now." As Cash entered the office, he was greeted by a warm smile from a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Hello, Cash," she said, gesturing to a comfortable-looking chair. "Please, have a seat. How are you feeling today?" Cash sank into the chair, his mouth suddenly dry.
"Nervous," he admitted, "but relieved to be here."
Dr. Anderson nodded understandingly.
"That's completely normal. Why don't you tell me what brings you here today?"
And so, Cash began to talk. He told her about the Halloween party, about his years of feeling out of place in his own body, about his recent explorations as Maisy. The words poured out of him, a torrent of emotion and realization that he'd kept bottled up for so long. Dr. Anderson listened attentively, asking occasional questions, but mostly allowing Cash to express himself freely. As he talked, Cash felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time, he was giving voice to feelings he'd barely allowed himself to acknowledge.
"Cash,"
Dr. Anderson said gently when he finally fell silent.
"What you're experiencing is not uncommon. Many people struggle with gender identity. The important thing is that you're taking steps to understand yourself better."
Cash nodded, feeling a lump in his throat.
"So, what do I do now?" "That's entirely up to you,"
Dr. Anderson replied. "Transition is a personal journey, and it looks different for everyone. Some people choose to transition socially, some medically, some both. There's no right or wrong way to do it." They spent the rest of the session discussing options and next steps. By the time Cash left the office, he had a follow-up appointment scheduled and a list of resources to explore. He also had something he hadn't had in a long time: hope. Over the next few months, Cash continued his therapy sessions with Dr. Anderson, slowly working through his feelings and fears. He began to make small changes in his daily life, growing out his hair, subtly altering his wardrobe to include more androgynous pieces. He started using a neutral name at his favorite coffee shop, testing the waters of living as someone other than Cash. As winter turned to spring, Cash, now going by Casey, felt ready to take the next big step. It was time to come out at work. The morning of the big day, Casey stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of a soft pink blouse. The face that looked back was a blend of Cash and Maisy, subtle makeup enhancing natural features, auburn hair styled in a feminine cut. Casey took a deep breath, trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection, echoing the words she'd said to herself on Halloween night. But this time, it wasn't about playing a role. It was about being true to herself. The drive to work felt surreal. Casey had arranged a meeting with HR and her immediate supervisor first thing in the morning. As she parked her car, she reminded herself that she had rights, that the company had policies protecting against discrimination. Still, the fear of rejection lingered. "Good morning," the HR manager, Linda, greeted her as she entered the conference room. "Cash, isn't it?" Casey nodded, then took a deep breath. "Actually," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves, "I'd like to be called Casey from now on. I'm transgender. I'm transitioning to live as a woman." There was a moment of silence, and Casey felt her heart pounding in her chest. Then, Linda smiled warmly. "Thank you for sharing that with us, Casey," she said. "We're here to support you through this transition." What followed was a discussion about company policies, the process of updating records, and how to announce the change to colleagues. Casey's supervisor, while clearly surprised, was supportive and assured her that her job was secure. As Casey left the meeting, she felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The hardest part was yet to come, facing her coworkers. Later that morning, an email went out to the entire office, explaining Casey's transition and asking for respect and support. As she sat at her desk, she could feel curious glances and hear whispered conversations. But there were also smiles, words of encouragement, and even a few hugs from closer colleagues. Rachel from social media, who had met Maisy at the Halloween party, stopped by Casey's desk with a grin. "So, that's why you seemed so familiar," she exclaimed. "I knew I liked you from the start." As the days passed, Casey settled into her new identity at work. There were awkward moments, of course. Misused pronouns, old habits die hard. But overall, her colleagues were supportive. She found strength in the small, everyday victories. The first time someone used her new name without hesitation. The day she finally felt confident enough to wear a skirt to the office. Months passed, and Casey's transition continued both at work and in her personal life. She started hormone therapy, watching with a mix of excitement and wonder as her body slowly began to change. She updated her wardrobe, learning to dress for her evolving figure. She even started dating, nervously navigating the world of romance from a new perspective. 1 year after the Halloween party that had started it all, Casey stood in front of her mirror once again. This time, there was no wig, no costume. The woman who looked back at her was simply herself, Casey, in a beautiful red dress, reminiscent of the one she'd worn that fateful night. She was heading to this year's company Halloween party, not in disguise, but as her true self. As she applied the finishing touches to her makeup, she marveled at how far she'd come. The journey hadn't been easy, and she knew there were still challenges ahead. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly comfortable in her own skin. Casey grabbed her purse and headed out the door, ready to face the world. As she drove to the office, she reflected on the past year. There had been difficult moments. Coming out to her family had been particularly challenging, and not all relationships had survived her transition. But there had also been moments of pure joy, of feeling truly seen and accepted for who she was. The party was in full swing when Casey arrived. As she entered, she was greeted by warm smiles and compliments on her dress. Dave, once again dressed as a pirate, approached with a grin. "Casey, you look fantastic," he said, giving her a friendly hug. "How are you enjoying the party?" Casey smiled, feeling a sense of déjà vu. "It's wonderful," she replied. "Though I have to say, I think I preferred your costume last year. This year's is a bit ordinary." Dave let out a hearty laugh. "Oh, I've missed your puns. Come on, let me introduce you to some of the new hires." As Casey mingled with her colleagues, both old and new, she felt a profound sense of belonging. This was where she was meant to be, who she was meant to be. The journey to get here had been long and sometimes difficult, but standing here now, she knew it had all been worth it. Later in the evening, Casey found a quiet moment to step outside for some fresh air. As she stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Penny for your thoughts?" She turned to see Rachel, dressed this year as a 1920s flapper. Casey smiled. "Just reflecting on how much can change in a year," she said. Rachel nodded, leaning on the balcony railing next to her. "You've been through a lot," she said softly. "But you know what? You're still the same person I met at last year's party, kind, funny, and with excellent taste in dresses." Casey felt a warmth in her chest at Rachel's words. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. Your support has meant so much to me." "That's what friends are for," Rachel replied with a wink. "Now, come on. I hear they're about to announce the costume contest winners, and I've got money on you taking home the prize for most glamorous." As Casey followed Rachel back into the party, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But she was no longer afraid. She was Casey, she was herself, and she was ready for whatever came next. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter, dancing, and celebration. Casey found herself at the center of many conversations, no longer the wallflower she had once been. She shared stories, cracked jokes, and even gave impromptu makeup tips to some of her colleagues. As the party wound down, Casey found herself surrounded by a small group of coworkers, including Rachel and Dave. They were sharing their plans for the upcoming holiday season when Dave suddenly raised his glass. "I'd like to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying over the dwindling noise of the party. "To Casey, your bravery and authenticity have not only transformed your own life, but have also made our workplace a more inclusive and understanding environment. We're proud to have you as our colleague and friend." A chorus of "To Casey!" filled the air as glasses clinked. Casey felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the show of support and acceptance. "Thank you all," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A year ago, I never could have imagined standing here like this. Your support has meant everything to me." As the party came to a close, Casey gathered her things and prepared to leave. She caught sight of herself in a mirror and paused, struck by the contrast between this moment and the same party a year ago. Gone was the nervous man in a costume. In his place stood a confident woman, comfortable in her own skin. The drive home was filled with reflection. Casey thought about all the changes the past year had brought. Not just the physical changes from hormone therapy, but the emotional and social changes as well. She had lost some people along the way. It was true. Not everyone in her life had been able to accept her transition. But she had also gained so much. True friendships, a sense of community, and most importantly, a feeling of finally being at home in her own body. As she pulled into her driveway, Casey noticed a text message on her phone. It was from her mother, who had struggled with her transition initially, but had been making efforts to understand and accept her daughter. "Hope you had fun at your party, sweetie. Dad and I would love to have you over for dinner this weekend if you're free. Love you." Casey smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't always easy, but moments like these made everything worthwhile. Entering her apartment, Casey kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. She moved to her bedroom, catching sight of herself in the full-length mirror. The red dress shimmered in the low light, and her auburn hair framed her face softly. As she began to remove her makeup, Casey thought about the journey ahead. There were still challenges to face. She was considering gender confirmation surgery, which both excited and terrified her. Dating as a transgender woman came with its own set of complications, and there would always be people who wouldn't understand or accept her. But as she looked at herself in the mirror, Casey felt a surge of pride and determination. She had come so far, overcome so much. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she had the strength to face them. Casey changed into comfortable pajamas and settled onto her couch with a cup of herbal tea. She pulled out her journal, a habit she'd started at Dr. Anderson's suggestion, and began to write. 1 year ago, I attended a Halloween party as someone I thought was just a character. Today, I attended the same party as my true self. The journey between those two events has been the most challenging and rewarding experience of my life. As she wrote, Casey reflected on the power of authenticity, the importance of self-acceptance, and the incredible capacity for growth that exists within each person. She thought about all the people still struggling with their identity, still afraid to be their true selves, and felt a renewed commitment to being a visible, positive representation of the transgender community. The clock struck midnight as Casey finished writing. She closed her journal and looked out the window at the quiet street below. A year ago, she had been terrified of what the future might hold. Now, she faced it with hope and excitement. As she got ready for bed, Casey made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to live authentically, to speak her truth, and to support others on similar journeys. Her life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined, and she was grateful for every step of the path that had led her here. Crawling into bed, Casey felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but for now, she was content. She was Casey. She was herself, and she was home.
Thanks for watching, my girlies. Be sure to check out Patreon for more.